Welcome back to Whispers in the Dark. Tonight's story is a confession. I never meant to leave behind a house with too many doors, a husband with too many keys, and a single room that taught me how thin a promise can be before it becomes a noose. Get comfortable, turn the lights down low. Now, let's begin. I didn't fall in love with him. That's the part people want, I think. The romance. The swept-away feeling, the glittering carriage, the silk gloves, and the ring that catches candlelight like a small, captive star. But there was no falling. There was only stepping. Step by step. Like walking out across a frozen pond you've been told is safe, while the ice complains under your weight. His name was Lucian Devire. He didn't call himself Bluebeard. Not once. No man ever names himself after the thing the world whispers when his back is turned. Yet the color clung to him anyway, an odd, almost bruised tint in the heavy beard he kept trimmed close to his mouth. In warm light, it looked dark. In cold light, it turned unmistakably blue, like ink spilled into hair, like a vein beneath thin skin. It was ridiculous at first, the kind of detail that should have made me laugh. I didn't, because whenever I looked at his beard too long, my mind offered a different thought. Not blue, but cold. And coldness has a way of turning laughter into caution. The first time I saw him, I was standing behind the lace curtains of my father's house, watching him cross our courtyard as if the stones belonged to him. He didn't hurry. He didn't look around with the anxious eyes of a visitor. He walked the way men walk through churches after they've already made a donation, slow, assured, expecting smiles. My father's estate had once been grand. Now it was a place with too many patched roofs and too few servants. My sisters and I had grown up learning the language of dwindling money, the quiet way a household tightens its belt. Fewer candles, thinner soups, gowns altered again and again, until the hems remembered hands that had never been ours. When Lucian arrived, the day itself seemed to dress up for him. The sky cleared. The wind, which had been harassing the trees all morning, turned gentle, almost obedient. His carriage was polished black, and the horses wore harnesses so fine the leather gleamed like wet stone. The driver's coat was trimmed with silver buttons. Even the wheels looked new, clean enough to reflect. He brought gifts, not the sort of small offerings a suitor gives to appear thoughtful. These were statements, proofs. A necklace for my mother, pearls like frozen tears. A cane for my father, the handle carved into a creature's head, some elegant beast with open jaws and gemstone eyes. For my sisters, bolts of fabric and perfumes in bottles shaped like apples. And for me, a mirror. That sounds harmless until I tell you what it was like to look into it. The frame was gilt, heavy as a crown, carved with curling vines and tiny flowers that looked too detailed to be made by human hands alone. And the glass itself, when I raised it, when I angled it to catch the light, didn't reflect like ordinary glass. The reflection had depth. I could see my face, yes, but also something behind it. Something shadowed, like a second layer of the world that only the mirror knew. Lucian watched me as I held it, and his smile did not reach his eyes. "It's a true mirror," he said, as if there were false ones everywhere, lying to us. "It shows what is meant to be seen." I should have put it down then. Instead, I felt selected. That is the trap of certain men. They don't just want you. They make you feel like you've been chosen by a force bigger than desire. Like fate itself has leaned down, pointed, and said, "Her." My father was dazzled. My mother, wary, but tempted. My sisters were already imagining silk sleeves and warm rooms and tables full of food. And I was tired of the cold in winter that seeped into our bones because we refused to burn enough wood. Tired of pretending our pride fed us. Tired of waking up with my stomach a little too empty and my future a little too narrow. When Lucian asked for my hand, my father's relief came out as laughter. A big, roaring sound, like a man who'd been holding his breath for years and finally found air. Lucian's proposal was quick, businesslike, almost clinical. He spoke of his estate in the northern hills, a place called Vire House, with fields and orchards and servants, and a library and a chapel. He spoke of horses, gardens, wine cellars. He spoke of generosity. He spoke of privacy. "There are rumors," my mother said carefully, as if she were testing the sharpness of the words. Lucian nodded once, as though acknowledging a fly. "People love stories," he replied, "especially when their own lives are small. They inflate others to feel taller." My mother looked at me after he left. Her eyes were a softer warning than her mouth could ever manage. "Men like that," she said, "buy silence as easily as they buy horses." My father shook his head. "He's wealthy, he's refined, look at the gifts." My sisters circled me like butterflies around a candle. "A real house," one whispered. "A carriage of your own," the other said. "You won't have to mend your gloves ever again." It's strange, the moment you realize your life is about to change forever, and everyone around you is celebrating. Yet, inside you, something has already begun to mourn. Still, I accepted, not because I trusted him, because I didn't trust the life waiting for me if I refused. We married in a small ceremony that felt too neat, too fast. Lucian wore black. His beard looked darker that day, less blue. His hands were cool when he touched mine, and I told myself it was nerves. It was winter. It was nothing. When the ring slid onto my finger, it felt heavy, not in a sentimental way, in a way that made my hand ache, as if it were a shackle disguised as jewelry. Then I left my father's home in Lucian's carriage, watching the familiar trees and fences slip away like a dream you can't hold. As the road stretched, the sky grew thicker with clouds. The landscape changed from gentle fields to harsher hills. The trees became taller and darker, their branches tangled like black veins against the gray. Lucian spoke little. When he did, it was to point out something ahead, that ridge, those orchards. The river runs close, as if he were showing me property, not welcoming me into a marriage. Hours passed. Dusk pressed against the carriage windows, turning the world outside into a smudged watercolor of shadow and stone. Then at last, Fire House appeared. I have seen grand homes before, in books, in paintings. But Fire House was not grand in that way. It was older, heavier, like a fortress that had learned how to pretend it was a manor. It rose from the hillside with a kind of grim patience, made of dark stone that drank the remaining light. Tall windows stared down at us, all of them dark. The roof lines were steep. The chimneys looked like broken teeth against the sky. An iron gate opened as we approached, though I saw no one touch it. Beyond the gate, a long drive curved through dead gardens, past statues that had lost their faces to time. The air smelled of wet earth, and something else underneath, something metallic, like old coins or dried blood. Servants stood at the front entrance when we arrived. They were dressed neatly, heads bowed, hands folded. But none of them smiled. They didn't look at me like a new mistress. They looked at me like a new offering. Inside, the house was warm. Too warm, almost suffocating after the cold outside. The hallway smelled of beeswax and smoke. The floors were polished wood, dark enough to reflect the chandelier's light like a pool. There were tapestries on the walls, scenes of hunts and feasts. But the faces in the woven fabric were unsettling. Eyes too bright, mouths too sharp, expressions frozen somewhere between joy and hunger. Lucian guided me through rooms, as if giving a tour. A drawing room with high-backed chairs, and a fireplace that snapped loudly. A dining hall with a table long enough for a dozen guests, though it was set for two. A library lined with books, the shelves towering like cliffs. The air in there smelled of leather bindings and dust and something bitter. A chapel with stained glass windows that cast colored light onto the stone floor. The figures in the glass, saints, angels, were distorted. Their hands were too long. Their halos looked more like rings of thorns. "The house is old," Lucian said when he noticed my stare. "Art ages in strange ways." His voice was gentle then, almost kind. For a moment I thought, perhaps I have been unfair. Perhaps he is simply different. Then he took me upstairs. The corridor on the second floor was narrow, lined with doors. There were so many doors, each one identical, dark wood, brass knob, keyhole like a tiny mouth. As we walked, my steps softened into the thick carpet. The air changed. It cooled. It smelled faintly of lavender, too sweet, like perfume trying to cover something rotten. At the end of the corridor was our bedroom. It was beautiful in a way that made my throat tighten. A huge bed draped in heavy curtains. A fireplace already lit. A wardrobe big enough to hide inside. Mirrors on the walls, too many mirrors. Lucian's servants had prepared a bath for me. Steam curled from behind a screen. A dress had been laid out on the bed, white, soft, expensive. I stood there, suddenly aware of the distance between my old life and this one, like a bridge collapsing behind me. Lucian approached, took my hands. "You will have everything you want," he said. His thumbs pressed gently over my knuckles. His touch was still cold. He leaned in and kissed my forehead. A strange kiss, not affectionate, more like a seal. Then he stepped away, and the warmth in his voice faded. "There is one rule," he said. The word rule hit the room like a dropped object. I swallowed. "What is it?" His eyes were dark, steady. "In this house," he said, "you may go anywhere. You may open any door. You may read any book. You may take any jewel, wear any gown, walk any corridor." He reached into his coat and pulled out a ring of keys. They jingled softly, like tiny bells. "But there is one door," he continued. "That is not for you." He placed the keys in my palm. They were heavier than they looked, each key unique. Some long and ornate, some simple, some old enough to have worn grooves into their teeth. And among them was one small key that looked different. It was thinner, darker, almost stained. Lucian's fingers closed around mine, forcing my hand into a fist around the keys. "If you open that door," he said quietly, "our marriage ends." The fire popped. Somewhere far away, a floorboard creaked. My mouth felt dry. "Which door?" He didn't point. He didn't have to. My body already knew. The house itself seemed to shift, like it had heard the question and was leaning in to listen. Lucian smiled again, still not reaching his eyes. "You'll know," he said. "Women always do." That night, I did not sleep much. I lay in the big bed, listening to the house. It was not silent like my father's home had been at night, with only wind and the occasional animal. Fire House had its own sounds, the way living things do. A soft groan as timbers settled, a faint tapping, like nails against wood, coming from somewhere deep inside the walls. Once I thought I heard footsteps in the corridor outside our bedroom. Slow, dragging, then nothing. Lucian slept beside me, breathing evenly. His body was warm under the blankets, but the air around him felt colder, as if coldness belonged to him the way scent belongs to roses. At dawn, when pale light seeped through the curtains, I turned and looked at him. His beard, in that gray morning light, was undeniably blue. Not bright blue, not ridiculous. The blue of bruises, the blue of veins, the blue of lips when the air has left. I told myself again, it's nothing. It's just his hair. But the thought would not settle. Days passed, and I learned the rhythms of the house. The servants moved quietly, always watching, always careful. They addressed me as Madame, but their voices held no warmth. They offered help, but not comfort. The cook served meals that were rich and heavy. Stews with thick gravy, bread still warm, pastries dusted with sugar. Food I'd only tasted on holidays, yet my appetite was strangely thin. Each bite felt like swallowing something I couldn't name. Lucian was often away. He said he had business in town, in the surrounding lands. He would kiss my hand before leaving, polite as a stranger. When he returned, he sometimes brought gifts, new gloves, ribbons, a book of poems. But every gift felt like the mirror he'd given me. Lovely on the surface, unsettling underneath. And always, the keys sat on my bedside table. At first, I tried to ignore them. I told myself, the rule is simple. Obey. Enjoy the comfort. Be grateful. Don't ruin what you've escaped into. But the house fed my curiosity. There were doors I opened that led to ordinary things. Linen closets, guest rooms, storage. There were doors that led to strange things. A room full of dolls arranged on shelves, their eyes painted too realistically. A music room with a harpsichord that played one note when I walked past, even though no one touched it. There was a long staircase down to the lower floors, to rooms that smelled of damp stone. The pantry, the wine cellar, the servants' quarters. And then there was the stairwell that went even further down, into the belly of the house. The servants avoided that stairwell. I saw them glance at it sometimes, quickly, like people glancing at a graveyard they have to pass. Once I asked the housekeeper, a thin woman named Margaret, what lay below. Her lips tightened. Old storage, she said. Her eyes were the color of ash. There is nothing for you there, madame. But my husband said I could go anywhere, I replied, trying to sound light. Margaret's gaze sharpened. Your husband, she said quietly, says many things. Then she walked away. That night, as Lucian slept, I sat up in bed and stared at the keys. They seemed to glimmer faintly, even in darkness. The little stained one almost looked wet. I told myself I was being foolish, that every marriage has rules, that every house has places you don't go. But the thing about forbidden doors is that they grow louder in your mind the longer you try not to hear them. And the house helped. I began to notice small details. A draft that always seemed to come from one specific section of the corridor. A faint smell, metallic, sharp, that would appear sometimes and vanish when I turned my head. A smear of something dark on the carpet near a particular door, as if someone had dragged something heavy. And then one afternoon, I found it. I was walking the corridor, pretending I was simply admiring the portraits that lined the walls. The portraits were mostly of stern men and pale women, all dressed in old fashions. Their eyes followed me in that way paintings do, except theirs felt too aware. I stopped near a portrait of a woman with a long neck and a high collar. Her hair was pinned back. Her expression was calm, almost resigned. Under the portrait, a small plaque read, Isabel de Vire, the same last name. My fingers brushed the plaque, tracing the engraved letters. The woman's painted eyes seemed to sharpen. I leaned closer, and that's when I saw it. A tiny smear of something dark at the base of the frame. Not dust, not varnish, a stain that looked like it had seeped into the wood. I straightened, heart thudding, and looked down the corridor. There were many doors, but one, 3 doors down from Isabel's portrait, had a slightly different knob. The brass was duller, scratched, and its the keyhole looked darker, as if the wood around it had been touched too often by something unclean. I stood there a long time, listening. The house was quiet, too quiet. Even the fire in the distant hearth seemed muted. My hand drifted toward the keys I carried now, always, because Lucian had insisted I keep them on me, like any mistress of the house. My fingers found the small stained key without looking. It was cold, not just cool metal, cold as if it had been buried in snow. I could have walked away. I should have. But the thought of spending my life in a house full of doors I wasn't allowed to open under the gaze of portraits that looked like they knew how my story would end made something harden inside me. My hand moved. The key slid into the lock with a soft, eager click, and then, as if the house itself exhaled, the knob turned. The door opened. At first, the darkness inside looked ordinary, just a room without light. Then the smell hit me. It was the smell of iron and rot, of wet stone, of something left too long in a closed place. I lifted a candle from a nearby sconce with shaking fingers and stepped inside. The room was small. Stone walls, no windows. The air was thick, heavy, as if it hadn't been disturbed in years. I saw metal hooks set into the stone, arranged in a circle. Some empty, some not. I took one step forward, candlelight trembling. The light revealed what hung from the hooks. Women, not living, not asleep, hanging. Their bodies were dressed in old gowns, some faded silk, some torn linen. Their hair hung loose. Their skin was pale in the candlelight, but not the pale of death alone. It was the pale of wax, of something preserved too carefully. Their throats were cut. The blood had dried black on their collars, crusted along their necks like jewelry made of old wounds. Some of them looked as if they'd died recently. Their lips still carried a hint of color. Their eyes were half open, glassy, fixed on nothing. Others were older, their skin shriveled, their hands curled like dead spiders. And there, against the far wall, arranged like a grotesque gallery, heads lined up on a shelf, each one placed carefully, hair brushed, faces turned outward like dolls. I couldn't breathe. My throat closed, my stomach twisted. The candle shook so badly the flame bent sideways, throwing shadows that made the bodies sway as if they were alive. One of the heads had dark hair and freckles across the nose, a face I recognized from a portrait downstairs. Isabel. I stumbled back, hitting the doorframe. My hand flew to my mouth to keep from screaming. room seemed to pulse. The smell seemed to crawl into my lungs. And then I noticed something else. The floor beneath the hooks wasn't clean stone. It was stained, layered with dark discolorations, as if the stone itself had absorbed too much blood. My gaze dropped to the key in my hand. It was no longer just stained. It was wet. A bead of dark liquid formed on its tip and slid down, slow as honey. Blood, fresh, as if the key had remembered what it was used for. Panic surged through me. I fumbled to close the door, to lock it, to erase what I'd seen. But as I pulled the key from the lock, the blood smeared across my fingers. And the key, no matter how I wiped it on my skirt, no matter how I rubbed it with trembling hands, kept bleeding. It seeped. It oozed. It refused to be cleaned. I shoved it into my pocket, slammed the door, and locked it again. Then I ran. I ran back to my room, down corridors that suddenly felt longer, narrower, as if the house had shifted to trap me. The portraits watched me with bright, hungry eyes. When I reached my bedroom, I slammed the door behind me and pressed my back to it, shaking. Lucian was not there. He was away on business. I went to the wash basin and plunged my hands into water. The water turned pink, then red. I scrubbed the key, but the blood clung. It wasn't just blood. It was like the metal itself was sweating it. I dropped it into the basin and stepped back, breathing hard. The candlelight flickered, and in the mirror Lucian had given me, the true mirror, I saw something I hadn't seen before. Not my reflection, not fully. Behind me, in the mirror, there was a figure standing in the corner of the room. A woman, pale, thin, hair loose over her shoulders. Her throat was cut. Her eyes were open, and she was smiling at me. I spun around. The corner was empty. I looked back at the mirror. The woman was still there. She lifted a hand slowly, as if greeting me. Then she pointed, not at me, but at the door. My heart hammered. No, I whispered, though I wasn't sure to whom. The woman in the mirror opened her mouth. No sound came out, but I saw her lips form words. He knows. The basin water rippled. The key, sitting at the bottom, pulsed like a small heart. I didn't wait for Lucian to return to confirm what the mirror had warned. I ran to the writing desk and pulled out paper and ink. My hands shook so badly the ink splattered. I wrote to my sister. Only one lived close enough, married to a man with land and a stable of horses. My pen scratched hard. Come at once. Bring help, bring men, bring weapons. Do not come alone. Do not tell anyone in town. Do not delay. I wanted to write more, to explain. But how do you explain a room of hanging women without sounding mad? How do you describe blood that won't wash away? So I sealed the letter with wax, my fingers trembling, and rang for a servant. A young maid appeared, eyes downcast. Take this, I said, pressing the letter into her hands. Write it to my sister, now. The maid's eyes flicked up just once toward my face, and in that glance I saw fear. Not fear of disobedience, fear of Lucian. She swallowed. Yes, madame. When she left, I locked my door. Then I sat and waited. Waiting is its own kind of horror. The house seemed to grow louder as dusk approached. The tapping in the walls returned, more insistent. The temperature in the corridor outside my room dropped. At one point, I thought I heard a soft scraping sound near the forbidden door, as if something inside it was moving. I kept checking the keys. The ring sat heavy on my bedside table, innocent except for the small key, which seemed darker than before. When night fell, the wind rose outside. It whistled through cracks, making the house moan. Then, at last, I heard the carriage. Wheels crunching gravel, horses snorting, a door slamming, footsteps. Lucian's footsteps were distinct, measured, patient. They didn't rush. They didn't hesitate. They climbed the stairs. The corridor fell silent. I sat frozen, candle burning low, the mirror watching me. The handle of my bedroom door turned. It was locked. A pause. Then Lucian's voice, soft as velvet. My wife. I didn't answer. Another pause. Open the door. My throat tightened. You said I could go anywhere. A small laugh. I did. And you said there was one door I couldn't open. Silence. Then quieter. Give me the keys. The words felt like cold fingers around my spine. I stood slowly, legs trembling. I picked up the ring of keys. The small one gleamed darkly. I approached the door, but did not unlock it. Why, I whispered, though I already knew. Lucian sighed, as if I were being inconvenient. You have always been curious, he said. That is why I chose you. Chose me, I echoed, bitter. I didn't want to marry you, Lucian continued, tone almost conversational. Not for love. Love is messy. Love leaves stains. His voice sharpened. I needed a woman who would eventually disobey. A woman who would open what she was told not to open. Because if you did not, you would not be truly mine. My stomach turned. What does that mean? I asked, voice shaking. Lucian's breath seemed to brush the other side of the door. It means, he whispered, that now I have proof. My hand tightened around the keys. Proof of what? Proof, he said softly, that you cannot be trusted. The mirror behind me seemed to darken, the reflection thickening. I imagined the room beneath the house, the hooks, the women, their cut throats. Those women, I said, voice barely audible. They were your wives. Lucian laughed again, but this time there was no humor. They were mine, he agreed, and they broke their promise. A sound, metallic, faint, came from the other side of the door. A blade. My body went cold. You're going to kill me, I said. A pause. Then I will do what I must. The house requires order. The house, I repeated, and my eyes flicked to the mirror. In the reflection, the dead woman was no longer alone. There were others behind her. A crowd of pale faces, mouths stitched in smiles, eyes shining. They pressed close, as if the glass were thin skin. Lucian's voice lowered. "Open the door," he said again. "Give me the keys, and I will make it quick." I didn't move. Lucian exhaled slowly, like a man calming himself. "Very well," he said. Then the sound came again, metal scraping metal. A key, his own key. The lock beneath my hand clicked, as if responding to him, not to me. My blood turned to ice. I backed away from the door. The knob began to turn from the outside. No matter how tightly I held my keys, no matter how much I wanted the lock to resist, the door began to open. Lucian stepped into the room like a shadow. He was still dressed in travel clothes, coat dark, boots polished. His beard in the candlelight looked darker until he moved his head and the blue shimmered. His eyes fell immediately to the keys in my hand, then to my pocket, where the small key sat bleeding invisibly. He smiled. "You opened it," he said, as if pleased. My whole body trembled. "Why do you do this?" Lucian's gaze drifted to the mirror. For a fraction of a second, something flickered across his face. Not fear, recognition. "Because," he said softly, "it is my duty." His hand moved, and I saw the knife. It wasn't a kitchen knife. It was long, thin, with a gleaming edge. The handle was carved bone. He held it casually, like a gentleman might hold a walking stick. "I was given this house," he said, voice calm, "and with it the key, and with it the burden." He stepped closer. "Each wife thinks she is the first," he murmured. "Each wife thinks she is different. Each wife thinks she will be the one who changes me." He tilted his head. "And each wife opens the door." I backed away until I hit the vanity, the mirror above it reflecting candlelight and pale faces. "I didn't know," I whispered. Lucian's eyes glinted. "But now you do," he said. "And knowledge is dangerous." He reached out, grabbed my wrist. His grip was strong, painful. He yanked me toward him, the knife lifting. My mind splintered. I screamed, not a polite scream, not a restrained sound, but a raw animal wail that tore out of me. Lucian's face tightened, annoyed. "Quiet," he hissed. The knife rose, and then the mirror behind him moved. Not the glass, the reflection. The pale women in the mirror surged forward, pressing against the surface until it bowed like water. Lucian froze. His eyes snapped to the mirror. For the first time, the calm mask cracked. Something like anger flickered, something like dread. The mirror rippled. A pale hand, gray-white, thin, with long fingers, pushed through the glass. It emerged into the room, as if the mirror were a curtain. Lucian jerked back, letting go of my wrist. The hand reached for him. Another hand followed. Then an arm. The smell hit me, cold stone, and old blood and perfume turned sour. The first woman stepped through. Her throat was cut, but no blood flowed now. The wound looked like a dark smile carved into her neck. Her eyes were open, shining with something sharper than grief. She looked at me, and for a moment I saw not a monster, not a ghost, but a woman who had once stood exactly where I stood. Then she turned her head toward Lucian. Her smile widened. Lucian's knife lifted again, but his hand shook. "No," he said, voice low, "not yet." The woman tilted her head, listening. Then she spoke. Her voice was a wet whisper, like breath through a wound. "It is time." Lucian backed toward the door. More women began to push through the mirror, one after another, stepping into my room as if it were their own. Their dresses dragged. Their hair floated unnaturally, as if underwater. Their eyes fixed on Lucian. He looked suddenly small, surrounded. "Stay back," he snapped, trying to regain control. He slashed the air with the knife. The women did not flinch. They moved together, slow, inexorable, like a tide. Lucian's gaze flicked to me. For a moment, in his eyes, I saw something like pleading. "Help me," he said. The audacity of it, after the hooks, after the heads, made my stomach twist into rage. I shook my head. Lucian's face hardened. "Then you are like them," he spat. "Ungrateful, disobedient." He lunged toward me, knife flashing. But the women surged. They grabbed him, hands like cold cloth wrapped around his arms, his shoulders, his beard. Lucian screamed then, not a controlled sound, but a high, furious cry. He fought, but their grip was strong. Their fingers sank into his coat, into his flesh. The knife dropped to the floor with a clang. Lucian's boots scraped against the wood as he tried to pull away. The women dragged him toward the mirror. He clawed at the floorboards, nails scraping. "No," he roared. "You cannot take me. This is my house." The first woman leaned close to his face. Her eyes were bright. "This was never yours," she whispered. Then they pulled him into the mirror. His body went halfway through, resisting like someone being forced through a too small doorway. The glass rippled around him, swallowing. Lucian's screams muffled as his head passed the surface, his beard disappearing into liquid silver. Then he was gone. The mirror stilled. The women remained in the room. For a moment, none of us moved. Candlelight flickered. My breath came in ragged gasps. The first woman turned to me. She stepped closer. Her feet made no sound on the carpet. She lifted her hand and touched my cheek. Her fingers were cold enough to numb. "You opened the door," she whispered, "so you could see." Tears spilled down my face without permission. "I'm sorry," I said. "I didn't know." Her smile softened, almost sad. "We didn't either," she murmured. Then she looked toward the keys in my hand. The small key was still bleeding. "Give it," she said. My fingers loosened. The keys fell with a heavy clatter to the floor. The first woman bent, picked up the small key between two fingers as if it were dirty. She held it up, and in the candlelight it looked darker than blood. "This key," she whispered, "is not for doors." She turned and walked to the mirror. The other women followed, moving like shadows. One by one, They stepped back through the glass. Before the last one vanished, she turned and looked at me. Her lips moved soundlessly. Run. Then the mirror became just a mirror again. My room was empty, except for the smell iron, lavender, cold stone, lingering like a bruise. I didn't wait. I snatched the knife from the floor, grabbed a cloak, and ran through the corridor. The portraits watched me. The house seemed to groan as I fled, as if angry. I flew down the stairs, past servants who stared with wide eyes. None stopped me. None spoke. They looked relieved, almost grateful, as if my escape meant something for them too. Outside, the night air slapped my face, sharp and clean compared to the house's suffocating warmth. I ran down the drive, feet slipping on gravel, cloak whipping in the wind. Behind me, firehouse loomed, dark against the stormy sky, windows like blank eyes. I reached the gate. It was closed, iron bars tall and cold, locking me in. My hands shook as I grabbed the bars. Open, I pleaded, though there was no one to hear. Then I felt it, something subtle. A shift. The gate creaked and began to swing inward, slow as a sigh. I didn't question it. I ran through. The road beyond was dark, muddy, lined with trees that clawed at the sky. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs felt like they might snap. And then, in the distance, I saw lantern light. Horses, voices, my sister's party. They had come. Relief hit me so hard my knees buckled. My sister cried out my name and ran to me, grabbing my shoulders, shaking me. What happened? She demanded, eyes wide. I couldn't speak. I could only sob, breathless, shaking. Men behind her held pitchforks, rifles, torches. Faces grim. They looked past me, toward the hill where Firehouse rose. Is he coming? One asked. I shook my head, throat tight. He's inside, I whispered. They didn't understand. They thought I meant he was inside the house, preparing to chase. They urged me onto a horse, wrapped me in blankets, and then they rode toward Firehouse. I begged them not to, but fear makes people bold, and boldness makes people stupid. We arrived at the estate just as dawn began to lighten the sky. The house looked different in morning light, less monstrous, more simply old. But the air was wrong, too still. The men forced the front door. Inside, everything was as I'd left it. Polished wood, tapestries, chandeliers. No sign of Lucian. They searched room by room. The servants were gone. Every bed empty. Every kitchen cold. It was as if the house had been abandoned overnight. Then they found the corridor upstairs. The men hesitated at the doors, torches in hand. Their bravado faltered as the air cooled, as the smell of lavender turned sour. I stood behind them, clutching my sister's hand. The forbidden door remained closed, the knob dull, the keyhole dark. One of the men tried the handle. Locked. He looked at me. Do you have the key? My stomach churned. No, I whispered. It's gone. The men broke the door anyway. forcing it open with brute strength. And when they saw inside, their faces drained of color. The hooks were empty, no hanging bodies, no heads on the shelf, nothing but stains on stone and a circle of metal hooks gleaming like teeth. One man vomited, another crossed himself. My sister pressed her hand to her mouth, shaking. It was here, I whispered. They were here. But the room was clean of proof. Except on the floor, in the center of the hook circle, lay one thing. A beard, not attached to a face. Just hair thick and coarse, curled as if freshly cut. It was unmistakably blue. My sister stared at it. A man stepped forward, torchlight trembling. He nudged it with the end of a pitchfork. It did not move. I felt the cold crawl up my spine. Something in the house shifted then, a deep groan, like stone settling. The torches flickered, and somewhere faintly, from the mirror upstairs, though we were below, we heard a sound. A soft, wet laugh. The men fled. They didn't bother searching further. They didn't argue, didn't try to regain courage. They ran out of Fire House like it was on fire, stumbling over each other, torches swinging wildly. We left that place behind. We rode until the estate was a dark smudge against the hills. We returned to my sister's home, where the fire was warm, and the walls were not full of watching eyes. But safety is not a thing you regain all at once. It comes in uneasy pieces, like stitching a torn dress. Weeks passed. People asked questions. Lucian's absence became a rumor, then a scandal, then a story that bent and reshaped itself with every retelling. Some said he ran away. Some said thieves killed him. Some said I killed him. I didn't correct them. How could I? At night, I dreamed of the mirror, of pale hands reaching through glass, of cold fingers brushing my cheek. Sometimes, when I woke, my throat would ache as if it had been cut. And then, one evening, months later, I saw my own reflection in a window pane as I passed. For a split second, I didn't see myself. I saw Lucian behind me, his blue beard gleaming faintly, his eyes bright, his mouth curling into that calm smile. My body froze. I spun. No one was there, but the air around me smelled faintly of lavender. And in my pocket, though I hadn't carried keys in months, I felt something cold. I reached in with trembling fingers. I pulled out a small metal key, thin, dark, stained, and when I held it up to the light, a bead of blood formed on its tip and slid down, slow and patient, as if the key had found me again, as if the house had not finished with me. Because the truth is this: Firehouse doesn't belong to whoever wears the ring. It belongs to the promise. It belongs to the disobedience. It belongs to the door that waits for a hand brave or desperate enough to open it. And somewhere, behind silver glass, behind a surface that ripples like water when the candlelight is just right, Bluebeard is still there, listening, learning, waiting for the next woman to step step, step across the ice. And if you think you're safe, because you don't live in a manor on a hill, ask yourself this: how many doors are in your home? How many locks? How many keys? And have you ever noticed one key that looks a little darker than the rest? One key that never feels warm? If you have, don't put it in your pocket. Don't keep it. And whatever you do, don't use it, because some doors aren't meant to be opened. Thanks for listening to Whispers in the Dark. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to leave a like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments. Would you have opened the forbidden door or left it locked forever? Sleep well.
Are you my next wife?
Whispers of a love so true, painting dreams of me and you. And I'll hold you close in this moment so divine. Whispers of